It's time to hear from our experts. We will hear from our experts for about 15 minutes. And then at the end of the panel, we will give you all the opportunity for a Q&A. So we are going to begin with Jamie Dahl, who is the incoming chair for the Society of American Foresters Diversity and Inclusion Working Group. Jamie is also the Molly Beatty Visiting Scholar and Forest Policy Society of American Foresters. She currently is a doctoral candidate of Education and Human Resources Studies, Higher Education Leadership at Colorado State University, and also serves as an instructor of Human Dimensions of Natural Resources, Warren College of Natural Resources at Colorado State University. So Jamie, I'm going to turn it over to you to focus on recruitment.
Okay, do you see the right stuff?
We're seeing presenter view.
Oh boy, okay. How about now?
Perfect.
Perfect, all right, thank you. So, hi you all, I'm very excited to be able to be here to share some time with you. And I was asked to focus on recruitment to natural resources. And what I'll really highlight is how engagement and inclusion are an integral component of that. So this is kind of what I think how it works. And this is, I think the other panel members will echo some of this. In order to recruit, we have to engage and include. And then if we're going to retain those folks, we have to keep on engaging and including. And that's like a continuous cycle. So I'm going to talk a lot about this pipeline and path component to recruitment. But since I was the first panel speaker, I also thought it was really important to start with acknowledging that there are many historical and cultural factors that contribute to our challenges in welcoming diverse folks to natural resources, that systemic oppression and discrimination still take place, and that's well documented. And that an exclusionary culture is also still present in natural resources. And it's going to take time to continue to change these issues. I also wanted to very quickly highlight Terry Sherrick. He has studied enrollment trends in forestry and natural resources for a long time. And a couple key highlights: forestry is slower to move with gender diversity as well as racialized or minoritized racial and ethnic groups. Terry also shares that discrimination against minorities with respect to access to land and resources is fundamental, and that many people have worked on this for a long time and still we're slow to make progress. And then another really important framing is that this is simply the right thing to do. So the environmental justice movement, which I use in some of my doctoral research, calls for the right for all people to participate as equal members in the discussions, processes, and decisions about their environment. So clearly that is something that we should strive for. And then also it points out that the earth and our natural resources are also negatively impacted by power imbalances. And that's coming from, I'm a forester, I believe in multiple use, but I also believe the resource suffers when we don't have the best people involved in the decision making. And something that I have learned in many years of teaching and in my doctoral journey is to do a better job of seeking different ways of knowing and seeing. And so there are many different views on the world and on natural resources. And I think we need to do a better job of embracing some of those different perspectives. So one to highlight is Indigenous peoples' beliefs and approaches. And so a quote from Kimmerer about traditional ecological knowledge points out that it arises where people are materially and spiritually integrated with their landscape. And I think that is an approach that we need to better embrace in natural resource management. And then I also wanted to highlight this Taking Nature Black conference that I think several folks involved participated in. And it was an awesome conference, and they have this really nice video recap that is still on their website that would just showcase some of the variety of perspectives and expertise that were at that conference. So in a nutshell, try on some different lenses more often. So I think this group is well convinced on this slide, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but it matters. Recruitment and retention matters. It makes good business sense. So we know that cultural diversity in the workforce promotes innovation, brings different and new perspectives, promotes creativity, better solves complex global problems, better represents a variety of stakeholders, better meets multiple uses, and is important to continued recruitment. So then I wanted to focus some on this pipeline, and I'm going to start with the base of the start of the pipeline, which is youth education and connection, and that came up clearly yesterday. So we already know that childhood exposure and experience is fundamental to folks choosing to study natural resources and work in natural resources. It also shows up in prior studies that racially and ethnically diverse groups tend to be exposed to natural resources in different ways as compared to majority groups. So some examples of that: minoritized groups are more common to cite school trips, volunteering, television programs about nature, youth nature programs, and job availability in natural resources. So these are things we need to pay attention to. So I actually looked at this some in a survey that I did of Society of American Foresters for my doctoral work. So we gave folks the choice to indicate youth exposure for them. So the bold came up the most commonly, and the blue came up the second most common. And then I asked, would you say that nature-based experiences, as described above, was a key contributor to you studying and working in forestry and natural resources? And the answer is a resounding yes. 93% said yes. And then when I asked about the frequency of those engagements, again, the vast majority, 75%, did this every 1 to 2 months. And then the next biggest chunk was they did it, several times a year, 4 to 5 times a year. So this is just reiterating, we need to connect with youth more. So I think a really crucial part of this recruitment is what we talked about yesterday. And so I did want to highlight Project Learning Tree. So I'm a Project Learning Tree facilitator, and I've done that work in multiple states for a long time. And it is an outstanding resource. Every state has a Project Learning Tree coordinator that you could reach out to. I would also encourage you to connect with the North American Association for Environmental Education for resources. But basically find out who is doing environmental education or EE near you. Who are they reaching? Who are they not reaching? And what resources and supports do they need that you could potentially offer? And if you were once trained in PLT but haven't been in a long time, they have a lot of new and amazing resources, so you should probably refresh. So I wanted to specifically highlight Project Learning Tree's Green Jobs module. So I use this pretty regularly, and it targets high school to young adult. And basically it helps showcase green jobs. And so it does some really important things. It highlights that you can make a difference. And this is a message that resonates with young people. It highlights that there is high worker satisfaction. We enjoy the work that we do. And it highlights that there is good job growth projected in the green jobs sector. And we know that this one is really important to minoritized groups. They look for this. And then it also does this. So I think one issue we have is, who do we showcase what do we showcase as natural resources, and who do we show? Well, here Project Learning Tree does a great job of not just the lumber mill worker and the logger, which is okay, but the orange vest, hard hat, chainsaw, D-tape, we showcase that, I think, too much. And there's all these other things, all these other components, all these other types of people who may not be out in the woods all the time. And also they showcase some other organizations that have nice kind of career highlights like that. So major shout out to PLT and the Green Jobs module. And also something that came up yesterday, but Project Learning Tree Canada is also very much leading in the social justice front. So they are doing some amazing projects with Indigenous communities and leaders. And then also last year, well, I think it's still in progress, they have this video series where they highlight different components of green jobs and showcase some very different types of people in that. All right. So hopefully I've convinced you to get back in with Project Learning Tree. And then I also wanted to talk about beyond education, what else is going on in that pipeline. And one thing that's there are barriers. So it is well documented that there are barriers to a career in natural resources, and they do show up more for women and minoritized racial and ethnic groups. Balker-Zeke did an interesting study where they looked at this closely in natural resources, and they actually grouped barriers into these themes: financial, institutional, familial, and social, and discrimination. So I also looked at barriers in my survey of Society of American Foresters. And so one specific barrier that I looked at is stereotype threat. This is being at risk of confirming as self-characteristic a negative stereotype about one's group. So it's basically the threat of feeling that that you'll like actualize a stereotype. And so I looked at this first comparing women and men, looking at it as it had been looked at in other studies, and did in fact find that women perceived greater stereotype threat within the SAF community than men. It was a significant difference, and the effect size was very large, which indicates a meaningful difference with practical application. And so it is documented that stereotype threat impedes academic and career success. So then I looked at this same thing across race and ethnicity in SAF, and again, it showed that racially and ethnically minoritized groups perceived greater stereotype threat within the SAF community than whites. It was again significant, and it was again a very large effect. So what does this mean? So we need to, for one, I think some people don't necessarily think these things are out there. Well, it looks like they're out there. And so we need to continue to gather information, to not assume, but ask and listen. We need to look to experts in social science and these other fields to help us. So there are actions that we know can help reduce stereotype threat. They include role models from minoritized groups, interventions supporting belonging and self-affirmation, mentorships, acknowledging and addressing culture issues in the profession. We can look for more support. So in some of those same categories as barriers, we can build supports to help get over those barriers or move those barriers. And promoting availability of job opportunities is a key piece of that. We can look to partnerships, which came up yesterday as well. So I think partnerships are crucial. We should not be doing this work alone. So this is a picture actually from a Project Learning Tree workshop I did with a historically Black college in Ohio and a local nonprofit. So we need to seek out groups who are already connected and trusted in these communities and work with them. We need to ask and listen and learn first and keep on doing that because it will keep on changing. And we really need to connect with folks who already have expertise in social science, DEI, environmental education. I also really encourage you to get engaged with Society of American Foresters actually has a pretty large, we're about 100 strong diversity and inclusion working group. So we work to support participation by the full diversity of people in our profession. There is some leadership now happening at the state level. We are really tied to this Society of American Foresters Diversity Scholars Program, which helps accomplish some of what this meeting is all about. And SAF also has some very successful mentorship models at the state and regional level. So if you're an SAF member, you can just go right online right now and join this working group if you're interested. And then I wanted to end on the important point that I try to always remind myself, I am not just recruiting natural resource professionals. I am building support and partners at all times inside and outside our field. So for one, I have and we have colleagues who do not think DEI and EE is important, or they believe it is someone else's job. So we have to keep working with those folks. And I also always remind myself, even if we do not recruit and retain, are we connecting and creating more allies? Because everybody out there is making day-to-day decisions that impact natural resources and the environment, and they are or will vote for policy and funding that impacts our profession. So with that, lots of references because I'm a doc student, and I look forward to the next panelist.
Thank you so much, Jamie.